Welcome to another episode of the Sage Holistic Show. My name is Emily Sellis and I am your host. And today we are talking about how hormones play such a huge role in your overall health. Have a listen as Crystal, our nutritional therapy practitioner, and I discuss this.
Sage is a 501c3 nonprofit organization building community by providing education and counseling about physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. We encourage all of our listeners to find their own path to what holistic wellness means to you.
I am Emily Sellis. I am the founder of Sage Holistic Health and Wellness Center, and I'm also one of the licensed marriage and family therapists. So excited to have Crystal Springy, one of our Sage family members. Hey, Crystal, to be here. And I'll let you introduce yourself, what you do at Sage.
Okay, my name is Crystal Springy. I do nutritional therapy and Reiki at Sage. I really work with the clients working on what foods that they're eating and helping them recognize if how they are either contributing positively or contributing negatively to their physical and mental symptoms. A lot of the time when we see these physical and mental health symptoms, it's due to just an imbalance in a nutrient in the body. So really making sure digestion is efficient and then also making sure that they're eating the right nutrient dense foods to be able to provide the body with all the nutrients that it needs.
Yeah, there's so many different topics that we could talk about with regard to how nutrition and the foods that we're eating directly impact our mental health. And, when that spiritual health is important as well, there's that component. I know you mentioned being a Reiki practitioner here at Sage, and I've loved our conversations that we've had about how even that practice and the work that we do as Reiki practitioners, myself being one as well, a Reiki teacher, it changes and shifts when we're more clear. The more clear we are in our bodies, the more clear we are in all these different ways. But regardless of all these different topics that we want to talk about, today we're going to focus in on hormones. And this one, I think, can be an interesting topic because sometimes we think hormones and we think that doesn't affect me, or maybe men might think, oh, this only affects women, because we are kind of talking about it more with our menstrual cycles and things like that. But today I just wanted to have this be our focus. I think you have a lot of really great points that you wanted to bring up about this. And let's start that conversation. So where would you say, if I was to ask you kind of first and foremost, like, how do you think hormones affect someone's overall health the most? What avenue or which area do you start at with that?
Well, I guess it would really just be understanding what hormones are. And hormones are chemical messengers in the body. And our body, if you guys follow some of my work, I'm always talking about how the body is trying to reach a state of homeostasis at all times. And hormones are actually what control homeostasis in the body. So hormones are in control of every single aspect, every single function. They're listening to our nervous system, they're listening to our microbiome, and they're kind of just sending those messages to our cells on really how to respond to what's going on. I would honestly say the root cause of every single disease is just a lack of homeostasis in the body. That could be stemming from so many different areas in someone's lifestyle, but really to start healing someone from any chronic disease, it's bringing that balance back into the body, therefore bringing hormones back into balance to be able to control that homeostasis.
Wow, gosh, so it does play such a big role. And I know I took your 6-week course, which was so mind-blowing for me. I learned so much from you, Crystal. And so I wonder, for those of you, those that are listening, like, that don't know about what the hormones are, maybe if you can name some of those hormones and maybe some of their functions. I think that could just make sure everyone's on the same page and maybe review for some people.
Yeah. And it's kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, how a lot of people maybe only recognize hormones as reproductive, your menstrual cycle, men maybe not really thinking they have to worry about it. But hormones are actually there's cortisol and adrenaline, which are in control of our stress response. We have insulin. Insulin's a hormone, so that has a big control of our blood sugar regulation. We have ghrelin, we have leptin, which are controlling our thirst and controlling our appetite. We have our thyroid hormones, which are controlling metabolism. They're controlling our temperatures in the body. So if
Mm-hmm.
we're accustomed to being too cold or being too hot, that could be a sign of a hormonal imbalance. Mood, cognitive functioning, our digestive system, inflammation, all of that are just all, there's
Uh,
about different hormones in the body. So that's only really scratching the surface of what they do.
Yeah. But when you're saying like hormones are the biggest player as far as like a body's homeostasis or kind of our overall health, I think that is a really important thing to bring awareness to and to understand some of these different roles that hormones play. So if you could kind of dive into maybe one topic that you could share with our audience about hormones. We also talked about what we were going to discuss today being that connection too between the mind and the body as well, which you're saying obviously a lot of these hormones play a role there. Where would you want to start to kind of bring up a topic around this?
Well, I would start with probably one of the most important hormonal functions in the body, which is going to be our adrenals, our adrenal hormones, which are the hormones that respond to our everyday stressors, which is going to be cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Those are all hormones that are excreted by our adrenal glands during a stress response. And of course, as our bodies were designed, they're only supposed to have a very short term acute stress response. For like a lion chasing them in the jungle, all of our resources get put towards the stress response for our survival mode or fight or flight. After the lion stops chasing us, all the hormones get balanced out and then gets dispersed evenly to all the other hormones. So I would say, and because of how important a stress response is and how our fight or flight response is for our survival mode, when we are in this fight or flight state, all our body, our cortisol and our adrenaline are stealing resources from all the other hormones in the body. So it's stealing resources from our reproductive hormones, it's stealing resources from our blood sugar, it's spiking blood sugar. So due to our modern lifestyle, we're all, unless you're actively managing it, we're all living in this chronic fight or flight response. So 24/7, all of our resources from all the other hormones in our body are really getting pushed towards this cortisol and really bringing us out of this state of homeostasis and kind of finding us in this state of chronic diseases because our hormones aren't able to be working effectively or just working effectively, really.
Yeah. And when you're saying that it's stealing resources, Crystal, how can you display that for, or kind of give an example of what that would look like?
Sure. So, for example, with our reproductive hormones, progesterone and estrogen always need to be in a perfect balance. Progesterone is actually used as a precursor to cortisol. So, when we are trying to get cortisol to, as a resource, progesterone is stolen from the reproductive system, put towards the cortisol response, and then that leaves an imbalance in our progesterone.
Mm. Oh
Uh,
yeah. And then that's going to affect the cycle and everything too for females and possibly things like infertility or anything like that.
100%, 100%. Because what progesterone does, it really helps with the ovulation process and keeping the egg in there. So
Yeah.
we don't have when we have depleted estrogen because of the stress response, like you said, yeah, that can definitely lead to a lot of PMS symptoms.
Mm.
PMS symptoms aren't normal, breast tenderness, a lot of irritability. And then also, like you said, infertility can be a really big thing because of.
Yeah. Yeah, and just because I remember from your class too, there can also be the traffic jam where there's too much of a certain hormone as well. I remember you talking about that, and I was so fascinated by learning about the liver's role in that. I don't know why, I just didn't realize like what the liver does. It's so important, and so like the idea of like the soy products, like a lot of people that are consuming a lot of soy products, thinking that that's better than I don't, for me, like I was doing that because I don't drink milk, you know, or lactose. And so I would have soy milk and things like that. When you shared about how you can get too much progesterone that comes from soy, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm like, I make sure I'm saying the right thing, but too much of a hormone can be a bad thing too.
Yes, and that's actually a really good point, because what we're talking about in that case is estrogen, and that's kind of right on track where we're saying progesterone and estrogen need to be right in balance. And two things can cause an estrogen dominance in the body, which is what I think you're saying. And one is because if progesterone's resources are being stolen and taken away towards a stress response, that leaves an estrogen dominance. But like you're saying with the soy products, soy actually mimics estrogen in the body. So that can give you an excess of estrogen.
Mm,
A sluggish liver can, because liver cleans up excess things in the body. So if it's distracted and sluggish from all these toxins, it's not going to go and clean up all the excess estrogens. What also actually could cause an excess in estrogen is they're called xenoestrogens, and you can find them in our beauty products, in our cleaning supplies, in our laundry detergent,
mm.
just all. That's why so many people are such big advocates for really keeping clean beauty and cleaning products, because stuff in there mimics estrogen, causing that estrogen dominance too.
Oh, that's so helpful to hear that. I mean, that's, you know, really understanding the chemical makeup of some of these things, because I know you can hear like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. And I mean, I know for me, a lot of times I hear like, oh my gosh, that's overwhelming to think of doing that. But when you hear like the reality of the reasons behind that, like that it really does affect this homeostasis in the body, and I'm sure there's other ways you're going to talk about too, about how that can affect us when there's not homeostasis with our hormones, but that's really helpful information. What would be another thing that you would point out about how hormonal imbalances can create issues? I know we had a post on that earlier today of some things you had highlighted, and just maybe kind of jumping in on some of those.
Yeah. So another thing that could cause a hormone imbalance is our blood sugar regulation. And again, because going always back to the adrenals and that stress response and why it is in such a huge control of how our hormones are regulated in the body. When we have a high cortisol response, it actually requires a huge spike in glucose in the body. So a huge
Mm,
spike in the sugar is a huge spike in your blood sugar, because again, we're talking about that scenario of a fight or flight response of trying to run from this lion in the jungle. What you're going to need to be able to do anything in a fight or flight situation is have this huge surge of energy. So that's why during that fight or flight response, we need this surge of glucose causing this imbalance in our blood sugar. Um,
mm,
yeah, it also could cause a drop. Also, in the drops in blood sugars, a lot of irritability, fatigue, anxiety can also actually be triggered from low blood sugar, just because, again, with low blood sugar, your body gets out of homeostasis. So your body creates the stress response. It triggers adrenaline and cortisol, which increases your heart rate, can increase sweating, and a lot of people correlate that to anxiety. So it really can kind of trigger anxiety in someone, and not really knowing that their diet could be causing all of that.
yeah, and then you're saying the diet because there's these spikes in like higher content of sugar, in, or maybe even eating more than what we need to, and having an excess of that sugar in the bloodstream, which can really create these things. And I mean, I think there's jokes about it, like you're being hangry or like all these things, but it's like, well, this is actually really happening. This is what's going on. It's not just someone choosing to be in a bad mood. I mean, there's the physical overlay of what's really happening. And so this knowledge is it arms you with like the ability to do something different. So stabilizing that blood sugar is important. And just what you're talking about, which is really the main thing we're looking at here, is that cortisol and how that really affects this with this high levels of stress that everyone tends to live with.
Right, right. And I don't think that people kind of really understand really what even is considered a stress in the body. I mean, a lot of people think like, oh no, work is fine, family's fine, like I don't have any stress going on. But really what a stress is that imbalance in homeostasis. When your body's out of homeostasis, that is a stress response. And that could be due to, yes, emotional stressors, politics in the world, but it also can be from a lack of sleep, over exercising, and honestly, just even one deficiency of a nutrient can cause an overall imbalance in homeostasis in the body, causing all the hormones to really wreak havoc in the body, just
Wow.
back into balance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It kind of seems like a pretty big deal to keep in check of all these things. I mean, what do you do with your clients to check in on these kinds of things when it comes to hormones?
It's always working on the foundations. I always say, no matter what your lab work says, no matter what the results are on your lab work, the first thing that you're always going to do is work on your foundations, which is working on the diet, making sure that you're getting all of the nutrients that your hormones need. Hormones, well, your endocrine system, which is your hormones are a part of, are probably the ones that are affected the most when we have a nutrient imbalance, because they require so many nutrients to be able to function properly. So like you're
Mm,
saying with my clients, I would always have them, one, so much hydration. Water is so important to transport all the hormones throughout your body. It transports them in and out of the cell. Fat and cholesterol too is a really huge thing that is going to help balance hormones, because again, we're talking about the hormones needing to come in and out of the cell. Our cell membrane is that main thing that has those receptors that allow the hormones to come in, and it's a phospholipid bilayer, so it's these fats that are in control of having the health of that membrane. So fats also help stabilize the blood sugar.
mm. Yeah, no, that's important. I mean, getting the right kinds of fats too. I know you've talked about that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the healthier fats. One thing too is like what I always, always talk about is just the health of the digestive system in general. And that's where I'm always going to be looking at, no matter what someone's experiencing, especially a hormonal imbalance, because if you're not able, one, if your digestive system is subpar and it's not able to absorb nutrients, you're not getting any nutrients that your hormones need to be able to function correctly.
Mm,
But also too, it's not even a digestive system not working properly. It's also a lot of people just aren't eating foods that have nutrients in it. Like
mm.
like you're maybe eating food, you may be like going to McDonald's or eating ice cream, and there's no nutrients in that. So really leaving us with the malnourished system, getting us out of homeostasis, and then our hormones just again not having those nutrients that it needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And so those foundations you're saying is like, can you go over those again? I think you have the 4 foundations, right?
Yeah, so foundations that will all bring your body back into balance, it would be diet, getting your body all the right nutrients that it needs. 2 is stress response management. And when I say that, it's not necessarily getting rid of stress, because there's always going to be stress, but it's learning how to manage your reactions to it, because cortisol only reacts to your reaction. When your nervous system has this fight or flight trigger, that's when cortisol is released. But you can have
Mm,
a stressor in front of you and not have this emotional reaction towards it, therefore not having the physical reaction to it.
yeah.
Exercise and movement. Movement, more importantly, is super important. Our body always needs to be in a constant state of motion. Our digestive system needs to always be moving. Our lymphatic system always needs to be moving. Our circulatory system always needs to be moving. And as you know, energy kind of just always needs to be moving throughout the body. So
Hmm.
just moving your body, stretching, breathing helps with the movement. Just
Hmm.
causes all of those to be so stagnant. And then the last one is just your environment, like what is positively affecting you and what is negatively affecting you. Because we talked about all these stressors going on, and like what's your environment? What are you watching on TV? Crime shows, reality TV with drama are all, you're going to be sitting there and all raising the stress response in the body. Friends that you have, friends that gossip, a cluttered house, um, what the environment that you're living in again is a really important last foundation.
Yeah, it's funny when you're saying that. I'm thinking of my kids love to play Super Mario Brothers. And I'll play with them too. Sometimes it's fun, but they get stressed out when they're playing because it's like, oh my gosh, I died. Like even something like that's meant to be fun, that stress gets triggered, and it's something that shifts out of homeostasis. So even positive things can create that stress response. So yeah, like you said, managing that is it's interesting.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So what about insomnia? I think sleep is one of those things, and I know I'd love to hear more from you about how the hormones play a role in insomnia, especially nowadays. I think a lot more people are struggling with healthy sleep and with all the stressors that are going on. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, yeah. So my understanding with insomnia that there's two big culprits, and it's the two things that we've really just been talking about this whole time is your circadian rhythm, which is controlled by your cortisol, and your blood sugar. So if you have high cortisol and high blood sugar before going to bed, that is going to cause a lot of sleep issues going on. Um, we have our circadian rhythm, which is controlled, like I said, by cortisol and melatonin, where cortisol is supposed to be the highest in the morning. You wake up, you have clarity, you have all this energy to be able to take on your day. Just slowly as the day goes on, it's supposed to slowly drop until it's the very lowest at night and you're able to peacefully go to sleep. When it's lowest at night, that's when melatonin kicks in at the highest, gets you to sleep, and then of course slowly drops until cortisol rises. So it's this very delicate balance. Kind of all hormones have a delicate balance, so when one's dysregulated, they're all going to be dysregulated. But
Mhm.
with what happens with that circadian rhythm is that almost because of our modern lifestyle, no one has that perfect cortisol curve. A lot of people will have a completely elevated curve. So again, your cortisol is going to be completely elevated before going to bed, not allowing melatonin to kick in, and again, having a very restful, wakeful night. Um, what also can happen is that reverse curve where you have cortisol the lowest in the morning, where it's a big struggle to get up. You have trouble getting out of bed. It takes you a long time to kind of get going. You need caffeine, you need sugar, you need, honestly, people use like fear sometimes too to spike up their cortisol levels. And then as the day goes on, you slowly get your energy back until you have this high surge of cortisol at night, which people can consider like a night owl. People think better at night. People start cleaning at night. And that's when you can see like that shift in that cortisol where, again, you have that high cortisol, melatonin doesn't kick in, you can't go to bed. And then, of course, we're talking about that blood sugar dysregulation when that cortisol is high. So is that blood sugar giving you the surge of energy for this cortisol response. And again, just a very sleepless night.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I know I do hear a lot of people like are just like, I'm just a night owl. So it'd be, I mean, it's curious whether that's just a preference and people that prefer having that reverse kind of cortisol curve. I mean, I know we probably can't get into it all today about like, is there pros and cons to that? Like having your cortisol curve be in the morning versus at night, but just, yeah, understanding about how insomnia and your sleep is affected by that cortisol and then that stress response of how you're managing that cortisol is going to really contribute to your sleep habits and whether you're able to get a restful sleep.
Yeah, and cortisol is very sensitive to light because again, back when our bodies were evolving, our cortisol would wake up as the sun came up. But nowadays we have electronics, we have TVs, we have LED lights that is confusing our cortisol and keeping.
Mm.
So kind of like that good sleep hygiene before bed would be turning off electronics, turning off any stimulus in that sense.
Yeah, I love that. That's a very like practical understanding of, you know, you hear like stay off electronics or don't do screen time like before you're going to bed, and just to understand it's the hormones that we're taking care of by doing that. I mean, that's truly what it is, keeping that delicate balance. So yeah, that's a great tip and knowledge, bringing that education piece in for why that's important, because that can help really create change when we understand these things.
Yeah, and then of course too, like I was saying, how it is a delicate balance with hormones, and cortisol is so important, but all the other hormones are so important too. And when we have this like influx of this curve, again, that's stealing from our reproductive system, causing so many of those like hormonal imbalance within our reproductive system, as
To
well.
have the reverse curve, you mean, like the reverse cortisol curve?
Yeah, I would say more so the elevated
Oh, okay, the constantly elevated.
one. Yeah.
Which I think, like, when we're in a society that is focused on, it's very capitalistic, it's very like productivity based, it's very much like how much can you get done, um, that's almost an encouragement or a like here's your hall pass, like go make your cortisol as high as you can all the time, because the more you do, the more money you make, or the more, kudos that you're going to get at work. So that's a real challenge, to come up with real life ways that you can manage that when there's just so many pressures pushing on all of us. I mean, I guess we are getting kind of close to the end of our time. Maybe because I know you focus on mindfulness, and I know you focus on tips and things like that. As we're talking about that stress response being so important, and managing your cortisol level being such an important piece, and I think probably the most relevant in everyone's lives with managing stress, what would you say would be a good tip to leave our listeners with today?
I'm always such a huge advocate, and my clients will attest to this. I'm always talking about being in the present moment. It's all about the present moment, because in the present moment is where your cortisol drops and there is that peace. Cortisol gets raised when you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about the fears, the worries of the future, the anxiety. Cortisol raises when you're thinking about the past, the should have, the could have, the would have, the sad, the guilt, all of that. And when your mind is just in these past and the present, that's a response telling your body to activate cortisol. We're in a stress response. But it's that present moment that really brings you that peace, that brings you that clarity. And to be in that present moment, it's really activating all of your five senses. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? What do you taste? And I always say too, those worries and those fears that you're thinking about and you're worried about for the future, to not worry about it unless it's happening in that present moment. That's the time that you do address it. That's the time that you focus on it. But if it's not happening in that present moment, then you're kind of ruining your peace in that present moment being worried about it.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is a lifelong practice, right? I mean, that is something that it's like such a beautiful and simple like thought to be able to do that. And yet, as you said, like all your clients here, you say this and it's the reminder. I mean, we all need reminders to keep doing those things, like breathe and like do the deep breaths and do all those things that are going to help us. So that's a great tip. And is there any last things that you would want to like share with everyone about like the overall health of someone really being dependent on these hormone balances and all of that? I feel like we could really talk for another hour about this, honestly.
Really, I would say it all begins with diet and the health of your digestive system. So making sure that you have a nutrient dense diet to provide your body with all the nutrients that it needs. Mainly your hormones providing it with what it needs, but then of course the rest of your body, so that way it stays in homeostasis and your hormones don't have to get dysregulated. I just say it always starts with food. And really tuning in to recognize how food is making you feel, either contributing to all of these symptoms that you're feeling, or helping and making you feel better. So it always starts with food, I say.
Yeah, and it is such an incredible difference that you can see when you have the discipline to do that, because it does take discipline in our fast-paced world, and we've gotten away from whole foods, and that's why it is such a foundational piece that you offer at Sage at our office, virtually right now, but for this class, the Whole Foods for Holistic Health, because it does start with that, and not just for hormones, but just overall health. I mean, food is such an important role, and it's also one of the hardest things to accomplish for those of us that it doesn't come easy, like you.
I know we're running out of time, but super quick too. A lot of the time is because, again, with that other stress response management foundation, so many people are addicted and relying on these processed foods because they're genetically modified to raise dopamine levels. So people are coping with so many of their emotions nowadays and calming their emotions with these processed foods, which
Yeah.
in turn then increases that stress response too. So it's just really kind of, again, incorporating that mindfulness to be able to lower your emotions, lower your reactions to the stressors. So that way you don't need to be relying on this, I mean, you can say food and sugar addiction, um, to kind of hide those emotions that you're feeling.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of those things that we don't even know that we have a lot of times because it's just common. This is just what our world does, what our society does, and so to even understand that that is what's happening, and then when you do have an awareness about it through having a different experience, it's also like, well, how do you stay in that space? And that's why, the groups that you put together, support groups, educational groups, like for people to come together and to really gain that shame-free, judgment-free place where it's not like you have to eat perfectly, because I know that's certainly not gonna I mean, I will eat junk food again, but yeah, but it's how often and how much is it affecting you, and really being able to make those decisions from a place of knowing for your own body what feels good. And that's what I just love about what you offer and how kind and compassionate and open you are with your clients and with the groups that you run, in offering that to people. So for all of you listening, if you have not been part of one of Crystal's classes yet, you've got to check it out when we have the next one, which will be coming up soon. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. And thanks for Crystal for being on here with me. And we'll look forward to doing this again next week.
Thank you for spending some of your time today with us at Sage Holistic Health and Wellness Center. If you like what we're all about, please consider supporting our nonprofit organization by making a tax-deductible donation. To do this, you can go to our website at www.sagewellnessctr.org and click on Donate in the upper right-hand corner. We look forward to spending some time again with you real soon. Take good care.